background, Middle Ground is a new nonprofit that's youth-led, and we are working on bridging the gap between Asian American and Pacific Islanders and politics. Bryce, Anisha, and I are just a few project managers for Middle Ground, and we're just giving this presentation on behalf of the rest of the organization. So next, I'm going to talk a bit about what you can expect at this webinar. So first, we're going to hear from our speakers, and then we're going to share, and after we hear from our speakers, there will also be a Q&A segment with them. Then we're going to share some statistics about Asian American representation and involvement in politics, as well as touch upon why Asian American representation in politics is so important. Then we're gonna talk about some opportunities and internships, as well as share some resume templates, as professional development is something that Middle Ground is pretty focused on as well. Great, so I'm going to introduce our speakers. So first we have Alex Lee. He's a candidate for the California State Assembly. We also have Jenny Chiang, who's the executive director of the Massachusetts Asian American Commission. We also have Sangha Kang-Le, an activist at Simmons College. And we have one more speaker listed here, Nandini Narayan, who is a Capitol Hill assistant and scheduler. Unfortunately, it seems like she was unable to join us today. However, I just thought I'd list her here. So I would like to invite each of our speakers to talk more about why they are involved in politics, share a bit about who they are, what they do, really anything that they're comfortable with doing. I'm going to hand it off to Alex first. Thank you.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, maybe where you are in the world. My name is Alex Lee. I am the Democratic nominee candidate for California State Assembly District 25, which is, California is the South and East Bay, so it's San Jose and Fremont, the major cities. I got involved in politics pretty early on. And it's kind of funny how I got started is because when I went to UC Davis for college, I made a very concerted effort to get involved and do student government, do all that cool stuff, because I remembered in high school, I was the complete opposite. I was very anti-ASB. I didn't do any of that stuff. I was also a political science major at the time. And at Davis, I became student body president of the entire school. So that was really cool. And then right after that, I worked for the state legislature. I worked as a policy aide and policy advisor for the state Senate and in the state assembly. Before running for the state assembly myself, I started running our campaign at when I was 23. I'm 25 now for District 25, but it's been a long time, as you can tell. And really, what has taught me, what the most important lesson I've learned from this is like, people in our districts respond best when there are people like themselves who are out there representing and talking about the issues that care. So if we can do both those things effectively, we can get more young Asian Americans involved. And that's what my belief is. So thanks for having me today.
Of course. Thank you for sharing your story. Jenny, would you mind going next, please?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Chiang. I'm the executive director for the Massachusetts Asian American Commission. We're actually the only state agency that advocates for Asian Americans, probably in all of New England. I know there's a couple of different ones throughout the country as well, so you might be more familiar with those. I know there's one in Washington, I believe in California as well. Growing up, I honestly never thought I would go into politics. My family never voted, and I never even knew who my legislators were growing up. So even in college too, I wasn't involved in politics. And I thought I would be doing more like nonprofit kind of direct service work after college. But after college, I definitely went on a route that I didn't expect. I actually was doing AmeriCorps, where I was doing more community organizing work in Chicago's Chinatown. And I was doing like GOTV work, which is like get out the vote, and organizing different lobby days. And that's where I really met different legislators and different organizations that were actually working on affecting policy for Asian Americans. So that's kind of how I navigated to the political realm, I guess. But yeah, happy to share more about that later as well. But thank you so much for having me.
Of course, it's our pleasure to have you. Sangha, would you mind going?
Not at all. Hi, everyone. My name is Sangha Kang-Le. I'm still a student. I'm a rising senior at Simmons University in Boston. And then during my college career, I've been pretty lucky to be able to dip my toes into politics at multiple levels. So I actually started out more focused in international politics. I worked briefly for the State Department in South Korea. And then when I got to college, Simmons College is right in the city, so I was able to dive in immediately. So that's probably my most robust experience. I worked for Senator Chiang, who is the only woman of color in the Massachusetts State Senate. She's the first Latino woman and the first Asian American woman to be take a position in the Massachusetts State Senate again. I've also done a fair bit of campaign work for her, so at the state level, and also advocating for certain city council races in the past year. And then most recently, I worked at the national level for the Warren presidential campaign. So I worked as a field organizer for that campaign and partially headed a project that was attempting to mobilize Asian Americans in the greater Boston area in early spring. So that's me. I accessed all those opportunities through programs, internships, fellowships that are available to high schoolers and college students. So I'm excited to speak on that and the different paths that are out there.
Great, thank you so much. So now we're going to transition into the Q&A portion of the speaker segment. We have a list of questions that we pre-planned before the webinar, as well as some questions that people submitted when they registered. There's also the opportunity to ask live questions. There should be a Q&A option on your screen, so feel free to submit any questions that you have. So the first question that I have for any of our speakers, is what or who inspired you to get into politics? I know you kind of touched based on that when you were sharing your stories, but it'd be amazing if you could speak a bit more on that.
Yeah, I can go ahead. So I think what really got me into politics, like I said earlier, like I never really thought that I would go into politics. So what happened was when I was doing AmeriCorps, doing community organizing work, I got really frustrated when our organizing work doesn't really seem to get through to the legislators. And I remember like one day we brought like 30 plus people from the Chinatown community to the state capitol in Springfield, Illinois. And I organized a meeting with the legislature to speak about the Trust Act, which is to limit state and local law enforcement to work with federal immigration. And I remember we actually ran into this legislator while walking to their office, and it seemed like the only thing the legislator wanted to do was to just take a picture with the Chinese community. And I got really frustrated and angry because I wanted to actually give them this information. And our members were mostly people from the immigrant community who weren't really English proficient in the first place. So they were happy to take a picture, but in the end, like, did the information actually get across? And while they took my information packet, like, they didn't really give me the impression that they actually cared about what we were advocating for. And looking back, that's when I realized, like, wow, some legislators might not really care about the Asian community, and might not care because we're not visible, we're not speaking out. And I think that's what really motivated me to actually do something about that.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. Does someone else want to speak on that question?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a little bit corny, but Bernie Sanders is one of the people that got me to run. President Obama, when he ran for re-election, that was when I was also applying to schools. And funny enough, I was choosing between like doing politics stuff or film, because those are the two things I really like to do. And something about that election kind of captured my imagination about it. And then I wanted to go into politics instead of filmmaking. Both are very much about storytelling, and that also gives you a sense of how late I do my college apps, because I decided when the election was happening. But Bernie Sanders, I think, was the kind of campaign, having seen two reiterations of his campaign, was talking about how, quote unquote, normal people can be in the process too. Sometimes we have that kind of barrier, right, where there's like these people that seem very important and seem so kind of mythically celebrities in some ways. But when you really break it down, all government institutions belong to us, and we should be able to access just as much as possible. And when we see a failing in it, we can, we have as much right to say we're better at it than anyone else, than any insiders, right? So I can also empathize how frustrating it is to just be sidelined by legislators or, people in politics like that. That's happened. I work for legislators, so sometimes if they don't want to take meetings and stuff, I'm the person that does it for them, and has to meet with constituency groups.
Yeah, I can speak on it briefly too. I think this is an experience probably a lot of you can relate to, but it's felt like I haven't been able to not be involved in politics for a while. I mean, the 2016 election happened in my senior year of college. The Black Lives Matter movement was in full swing the year before. And then 2018 was my freshman year when we were seeing all of this like groundswell of women and women of color be elected. And I've always been really interested in issue advocacy, and similar to Jenny, for a long time it felt like politics was a barrier in that work, right? Something we were coming up against. But then I had an experience when I was interning in the State House my freshman year. The March for Our Lives movement was happening that spring. And I had a couple friends who were just a year younger than me, who were still in high school, who were big organizers for the March for Our Lives movement. And there was a day of advocacy where students from all over Massachusetts came to the State House in Boston and had an opportunity to speak with legislators. Legislators had a chance to respond. And I was on the other side of the desk, weirdly. A year before, I would have been marching with them. But this time I was taking notes. I was writing a memo for my legislator who couldn't be there. And I felt like there was actually a lot of power in that position when you're still plugged into the issues and the movements that matter a lot to you, but you have a little bit more insider knowledge, some purchase, some voice with the people who have power. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was a really, really empowering story that you shared right there. My next question is, I guess this one is the most relevant to Sangha because she's still a student, but I guess what are some opportunities, or what were some opportunities and experiences that you had, whether that be internships or whatnot, that kind of inspired you to pursue politics or to push you towards this field at least?
Definitely, yeah. So the first thing I pursued was the Asian American Women's Political Initiative Fellowship, AWPI. I applied for it my freshman year, not expecting to get it, and ended up having this incredible experience. So it was through that organization that I was able to get this internship with Senator Chiang in the State House. And it was a combination of things, right? So we were doing our own learning independently, because you have to know, like, how does the lawmaking process work? Like, how do bills go through? What is the House on Ways and Means? Like, how does campaigning work? How do you self-represent? So a lot of that learning is necessary to feel like you can keep up in State House work, in legislative work. And then what was paired with that was we were getting to meet and talk to Asian American leaders in Boston. So some of them were elected officials, some of them were nonprofit people, some of them were grassroots organizers. So being able to have the dual experience of like getting some hands-on knowledge and seeing how things work up close, and then getting support and hearing the stories of people who share similar life experiences to you was huge for me. So I'm not sure, AWPI is Massachusetts based. Obviously organizations like yours are all over the place and becoming more and more powerful and helpful to people, to young people. And then I applied, what else did I do? From that, like using that as a springboard, I was able to get into campaign work. So it was through knowing Sonia Chiang Diaz and through knowing the directors of this program that I was able to like reach out and be like, hey, I want to get involved in campaigns. Who can I reach out to? Where can I look? What's out there? Yeah, and then in terms of, and I'm not sure how many people are interested in international politics, just to speak very briefly on that, there are actually an abundance of State House programs, Fulbright programs for students, for high school students, that if not like directly politics focused, are at least like a really interesting way to see how institutions like the State Department function and look at the role of US politics and policies abroad. So yeah, those are a couple of the things I did. I hope that's helpful.
This question's open for anyone. So if Alex or Jenny, if you have anything to add, if not, like we can totally move on to another question.
I'll just say really quickly, in California, I got started doing internships as well in the state capitol. There was, so there's a group called the Asian Pacific Islander Capital Association, and they did paid internships during the summer. And that's what I did during college. And that was my second internship I did in the Capitol. I did like 4 or 5 internships until I got a job. So, that is one way to do it, right? You can do internships, you can try to get jobs. Some people don't even do internships at all. They just apply and they get jobs. So not every pathway to politics is the same, right? It's unique for your self and unique for your skill set. So if you feel like there's a path that's better for you, you can do that way. So don't feel like you have to conform to any path. Because I know some people are fantastic and they had experience doing AmeriCorps or whatever, Peace Corps, and worked in the private industry, and then they hopped over to the state capitol. But they always had that passion. So you don't have to take one direct route.
Yeah, I would just add a plug for volunteering as well. I think, people don't really, I guess people undervalue volunteering. I think people might tend to think like, oh, like, wow, am I gonna spend my time, handing out name tags or handing out program books? But I actually volunteered at my organization that I'm currently at right now, the Asian American Commission, back when I was in college. And, I was doing that kind of work, and I was still connecting with different folks and meeting different community leaders and healthcare professionals and academics. And I think that really springboarded me to get more connections and to kind of find my place where I am right now in my career.
Great, thank you so much. So the next, first of all, it definitely sounds like there are a lot of different ways to pursue politics. And actually later on in this webinar, Bryce, Anisha, and I will be sharing a few internships and volunteering opportunities that we found while doing some research. So anyway, our next question would be, why do you think that there is an underrepresentation of Asian American and Pacific Islanders in politics?
I can take this one first if you want, if anyone wants. Okay, so there's the thing is like I consciously try not to speak first as if I'm the only male speaker. So that's just the thing I try to practice. But I think there aren't enough Asian Americans in politics, I think, for a couple of reasons. So there's a lot of different reasons, but one is that it generally is not seen as culturally, I think, a lucrative way of doing things, right? Either lucrative in sense of your own status, your own financial well-being, or in a ways of making change, right? And that's sometimes okay. So if you feel like you can make change better in the private sector or nonprofits or other stuff like that, that's okay too. But I think what's hard is, because speaking as a candidate, right? You have to put yourself out there and be judged by thousands of people at the minimum for any of these jobs. And sometimes I think that's not how a lot of us are raised to feel like that's the way we want to seek the limelight, because in the reality is that politics rewards people who speak a lot, who get on their soapbox and look good and all those things, but not people who are well thought out and listen a lot. That's what I've learned as well. It doesn't naturally reward people that way. You can, obviously, and that's what I'm hoping to change, is more people are active listeners, people who actually bring good ideas. But a lot of people who are generally have more status and all that things generally do better in politics. Even in my assembly district, so Assembly District 25 is one of 2 API plurality districts in the entire state. So fortunately, I'll be representing a younger and more diverse district. But there are other API legislators as well in California from districts that aren't API majority. But it's difficult because even in my district, with I have 5 cities in my district too, there are a lot of people in power in local government who are still, the traditionally very old, very white, very male. And even though demographics don't reflect it, right? It's because I don't think enough people are realizing we have a lot of say in government and a lot of say in doing things that way. And the more and more people who look like us and say things like us and have ideas like us and bring them to the forefront, we're more encouraged, right? So I'm very much encouraged by all the protests and all the activism that's happened recently, obviously because of police brutality, and more people waking up to the fact that local government is like not that hard. A lot of people, I think a lot of activists are figuring that out. It's like, you don't actually have to have these high barriers. And once you figure that out, you can run for office. So I'm very pleased to be supporting too a lot of local candidates in my district in the Bay Area who are average age, probably 20, even younger than me right now, running for local office, because people who are running on platforms like to defund the police or to build more affordable housing or to fight for local, Green New Deal or sustainable economy, these ideas are not things that, people who are 80 years old do not like. They actually like these things too. It's just how we package them and how we're brave about them. So I think with more people like ourselves who step up to the forefront, whether it's as the face of campaigns or in the background, which is super important, even more important, the behind the scenes work, I think more and more people will be empowered to do so. So there's a lot of variables and there's a lot of barriers we have to climb over, but I think one by one, each time we get through, it's gonna lower those barriers for everyone else.
I can also say something briefly about this. It's a hard question. I don't know what the answer is. I agree with what Alex has said. I would also touch on 2 more things. One is the model minority myth, which is something I've come up against. So one of the ways it manifests is that Asian Americans are associated wrongly with traits like quietness, obedience, keeping to themselves. So again, I agree that to be involved in politics is to make a lot of noise a lot of the time, which is not something that's usually expected from Asian Americans. And it's also not something that we're trained to do, to self-represent and like push for our interests in that way. So yeah, I think that will change. As Alex said, the more and more young people start running for office, the more and more we're feeling seen, and the more Asian Americans we can see in positions of power. One other quick thing is that I've come up against is the idea of ownership, right? So to feel like you can be an effective change maker in a political system, you kind of have to have a sense that you own the system, right? It works for you. And I find, again, that's not something that's naturally taught to Asian Americans growing up. I'm 3rd generation, and even for me, as my parents were born in this country, it still was a learning process to feel like, no, these elected officials are accountable to me and people who look like me.
Great. I'm not sure, Jenny, if you have something to add to this. Otherwise, one of our live Q&A questions is pretty relevant to this past question. But do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to agree with Alex and Sangha. I think it's definitely a very hard question to answer. Like, we don't really see many Asian Americans in leadership positions or even at the State House, right? And I think like Alex said, we're cultured to not really go into politics. Like I've heard from my family, like it doesn't make enough money, it's not stable. Like they don't know what it means to be in politics, and they don't really know what work is being done. So I'm a 2nd generation Asian American, and it's incredibly difficult for me to explain what I'm doing to with my family. When I first started this position, I started as an interim executive director, and my parents were like, "What does that mean? Like, are you an intern still?" So it's just trying to navigate that curve, and I think given what's been happening so far, like I'm incredibly impressed with like the different resources and tools to speak with your family about racial justice. And I think if we keep going on that path, like we can definitely influence more Asian Americans to join.
Great, thank you so much. So the next question is, how did you all overcome these barriers or assumptions about being Asian American and being involved in politics. I know, Jenny, you just mentioned like resources so that you can communicate more easily with your family about what you're doing, but do you have any other suggestions or stories to share about how you overcame such barriers and struggles?
I can say something. I mentioned this briefly before, but for me, especially as I was just getting started, having like some sort of a cohort or a community of people going through a similar experience was massive. So to be doing a State House internship and then being able to come back to my cohort and be like, did you guys experience this? Is this something that you're noticing? And to get that kind of validation and be able to talk through things and, you know, how do we address this, was huge. So obviously that's a hard thing to create. But I think more and more those spaces are available. So I would say it can help tremendously to try to invest in creating that kind of a community, especially as you're just getting started.
Okay, so we can move on to one of the questions that some folks submitted before the webinar. So one of them is, what can we as Asian American and Pacific Islander youth do to encourage political engagement among both AAPI youth and as well the older generation?
So I think how API youth can really make sure that especially your peers are engaged is, you know, something you already actively do, right? You're probably on social media a lot. You're probably talking to your friends, and you cannot underestimate the power of word of mouth. And word of mouth today looks different. Right? Word of mouth can be posting on your stories, tweeting about something. You can't underestimate that, because once you're that one person in your friend group that's like, you see all these tweets and all these things about like your friends voting, and you're like, oh, I don't even know how to vote yet. You know, something's gonna change, right? And I think even in my life, right, even as someone who is running for state office, I would probably gather to say probably 75% of my friends that I know personally still do not vote. There's one friend that's very infuriating. I cannot get him to vote. It's so infuriating. I've even lived with him, and he will just refuse. It's just annoying. And he even can vote for me. So I'm like, why, you know, if anything, you can at least vote for me. You know me. But, you know, like, it's just having that social pressure helps, right? And having people talk about it. Because then it's no longer this weird thing about like, oh, it's a Biden versus Trump, or it's this tax measure versus this tax measure thing. You know, it's about like, well, these are the things we're all together in that we care about, and we want to change things. So let's vote. And it also helps with what, you know, we talked about with cohorts too, is a lot of friends will say, hey, how did you vote on this thing? You know, how did you do this thing? Especially since we're doing a lot of mail-in ballots now. And I highly encourage you to get a mail-in ballot no matter where you live. It is so much easier. You don't have to show up anywhere. You can mail it ahead of time. I've been doing that ever since I've been an 18-year-old voter. So, you know, doing it together always helps, right? And being able to talk to these things and not feeling alone. And the more and more you realize it, the more and more people are thinking these things, right? Sometimes maybe you'll post something you feel is very radical, maybe just because of you know, the people you're around, more or less. But you post it around, and then there are people who are like, yeah, that's what I was thinking too. You know, and you get people invigorated, right? That's a small things. And then you keep increasing from there, right? So then you first talk to your friends, you get them to vote, you get them activated, and then maybe one day you're, you know, and I've seen this too with some groups down here, where it's like, you know, friends who are, they're in the 18 to 20 range, they run for office, right? And that's happening in the Bay Area, and you're all like, hey, why not? You know, a lot of you folks on this call, I'm sure, have a lot of the professional skills to organize, to create things, and basically start a small business. So that's what a campaign is. It's a small business, essentially. You raise money, you market, you know, it's all the same skills, same transferable skills. So you could do it, you know. So it's all about building that cohort, influencing each other positively, and really getting there. So like, I really would emphasize, like, literally today, like, post somewhere about like registering to vote. Figure out when your state, when the deadline is, because right now, I don't want to assume everyone is Democrat, obviously, but, you know, right now there is an assault on mail-in ballots, right? So the sooner you can get and make sure that you are registered to vote, the sooner you can at least exercise your right to vote. Because a lot of people died just getting the simple little thing of, you know, being able to vote, and that's the smallest measure of participation we can do. And if you can start voting, you can do a lot more, you know, because once, there's also another truth is that if you don't vote, politicians don't pay attention to you because they do this thing, and I don't do this in my campaign, but they target based on your voting propensity, which is how often you vote. So if you only voted once out of 5 elections, they generally don't care about you because they think you're an unreliable voter. And that's why a lot of policy skews conservative, right? Because a lot of conservative old people who are retired, they vote every single election because there's, you know, what else are they going to do, right? So you want to be that person too. You want to be the person they pay attention to because then maybe in like 2 years, defund the police is a mainstream issue, you know, and you want that to be at the forefront. So get involved, post about it today, figure out when, you know, share the information about it, and it's going to be really helpful that way. You know, we live in the age of IG infographics right now, so everyone loves that.
Yeah, I would definitely echo everything Alex said, but also put a plug for the census as well. I think data is so crucial to everything that we do. And there's such a huge lack of data for Asian Americans, especially. So the more data that we have, the more resources we can get. So it's incredibly important to tell your friends, tell your family to vote, but also to fill the census.
Definitely. Oh wait, Sangha, do you have anything to add to this question?
Yeah, just a quick plug, in addition to what the other two have said. If you're someone who's bilingual, if you have translated infographics, translated instructions for how to vote, translated information about a specific bill or policy, in my experience, makes a huge difference in actually, that's less for younger Asian American voters and more for older Asian American voters, but we're kind of in a unique position that we have the ability to kind of bridge this gap. Just that pretty simple act I've found has made a world of difference in the past.
Great. So the next question, it's, I guess, kind of related to the question that I just asked, but so do you have any tips for when you're just getting started with politics and everything just feels really overwhelming?
I just say it's okay. It'll always feel overwhelming. So just get used to that feeling. There will always be, you know, sometimes in a good way, right? There will always be things to learn about, always things to figure out. And if people sound like they figure things out, you know, they're overwhelmed in just a different level. So be okay with that. When you're starting out, I would say figure out what you really want to achieve, right? What you want to get out of it. Some people want to just do it to network. Some people want to get a job. Some people want to be active, you know, have influence activism and get something done, right? So figure out what you want, just like many things in life, right? Will help you figure out how to get there. So if you want to do an activism route, I would say really figure out what your passion issue is, learn about it, and then find out what are the groups and other people that are passionate about it as well. Locally, there will always be a lot of groups. I mean, locally across country, there are Sunrise chapters. There are you know, a lot of different organizations that are advocating for different things. So get involved that way. And I've always felt that it is personally, it's stronger to bond with people over an issue than something more superficial, say just being, you know, wanting to network or something. So I think that would be helpful. Yeah.
I would just say that, like, yeah, politics can be very overwhelming at times, but also something that I've definitely learned through this experience is to practice self-care and to understand that you don't always have to be there, that you can take a break. You can have your space, you can do your personal things, like you don't have to be active 24/7. Because there's other things that you can do. I think people really emphasize that, you know, to be successful, you have to be very active. You have to be working nonstop, and that's not the case. You have to have time for rest, and you have to have time for yourself and your family. And I think that's the only thing. That's the only way that you can get through working in politics.
I would say, as someone who is in many ways just still starting out, one of the best things to do, especially when you're still learning about what you want to do and what's important to you, is to identify someone who you really believe in, and who you think is doing great work, and literally just attach yourself to them. Volunteer for them, anything you can do for them. Because I find with political work, it often feels like it's so slow moving. Like you put in so much energy to get like an inch of progress in whatever it is you're trying to do. But if you really trust the person that's leading you, or you really trust the process, it's a pretty easy thing to do. It still feels rewarding.
Great, thank you. So as we overcome this barrier of being overwhelmed by doing things, as you said, kind of like self-care and really believing in certain political figures, etc., how do you navigate, or what are some tips to navigate conversations with people who just don't want to be involved or simply claim that they are, quote, apolitical?
I would say one thing I've found helpful is to know policy really well. So oftentimes when you're talking at like an issue level, it's easy to get into things where like the system is just broken, or like I don't see what difference my vote is going to make. But if you know, like, okay, you believe in housing security, well, there's this bill on the table that would prevent evictions for XXX number of people, or people below with that whatever characteristics, or like anything like that. When you can speak to a specific thing like that, that it's pretty easy to make a case for what kind of tangible difference it would make. It's hard to, becomes a more productive conversation in my mind.
I guess I would say that, I think my family is definitely very apolitical, and it's definitely been hard to motivate them to actually get involved and to vote, right? And some of the things that I've kind of tried to use that might have some influence is like, local politics, and it influences basically your everyday life. Like it depends on when your trash gets taken out, if they'll put a stop sign at that street, things that will impact you on a daily basis. I think that's really helpful in terms of like trying to get them to understand how politics can make a difference in your life. And I always think of like, if in my city like 100% of Asian Americans actually go out to vote, like that's something that legislators pay attention to, and something that legislators will kind of be afraid of, right? Because they work for the constituents, and if Asian Americans aren't really voting, but all of a sudden have this dramatic change, that's something that they need to pay attention to.
I'll say those are excellent points of ways doing it. I think another way is also enthusiasm, right? So this comes into where you play in either volunteer or in your own life, is that if you show a lot of enthusiasm for election or issue or candidate or something like that, the people that care about you enough will also care about it, because they're like, oh wow, you care about enough, I guess I should pay attention to it too. In our election in March, we had the primary in March, thankfully. I had a lot of conservative people even vote for me, even though I'm very progressive versus, because they knew that our volunteer base and myself were very enthusiastic and actually understood how to do the job. They trusted me enough, right? So if the policy route doesn't go, you can try the personal relational route, right? Saying, look, this is what I care a lot about. I really want to make this change, or we want to do this together. Can we at least do your part, sort of thing? And I think that helps, right? Because the more people that are enthused about a candidate or issue, it helps, right? It's, we're living in the social bubble ages. So it really does work, I think. The more enthusiastic you are about something, it really rubs off on other people. And, if you are one of those people who volunteers their time to go on weekends to either help with the census or help on a volunteer campaign, someone's going to notice that. He'll be like, it's 100 degrees, like right now over here, it's like 100 degrees and you're knocking on doors or something. People are going to take notice of that. This is obviously pre-COVID, but you know what I mean? But, or you're phone banking or doing something, people, if you do it genuinely and you take the time to do it genuinely, people notice it. And they're like, wow, okay, you're 18 years old or you're 17 years old and you're doing this for your city council candidate or something and you actually care about them, people can tell, versus, if you're doing it to do as a resume thing or whatever, and you're kind of half-heartedly doing it, people can also tell that. So if you really care about an issue, it shows to other people and that gets them pumped up, right? And hopefully that way also gets older folks to vote. So I actually got, this is also unusual amongst local my parent age of voters, is I got the very enthused to vote for me, even though I was the youngest candidate, just because I showed that I knew how to do the job and people liked it. And, identity politics comes into play, right? But there are other Asian candidates in my race as well. But they were very excited about it because I was actually doing the work and I was very knowledgeable and stuff. And if we can prove and disprove the barriers about these things, then they will get very enthused about it. And then hopefully they'll vote, and they'll vote progressive too.
Thank you so much. It definitely seems like as long as like you kind of think about how this like impact is actually meaningful, it helps with the bigger picture. So actually, we just have one more question before we wrap up the speaker portion. This one's pretty open-ended, but I guess if there is one thing that you want all of the attendees, who I presume are probably all youth, if there's one thing that you want them to take away from everything that you've said today, what would it be?
Yeah, I can go. So I would say definitely don't be afraid to reach out and make connections to people who you've probably never met before. To volunteer in campaigns, to try to get internships at the State House or with local legislators, or even working with nonprofits. Like I think that's like any step you can take to make these connections is something that's going to be really valuable for your life. And I think it's important to also know that advocacy can look very different. It doesn't always have to be, you protesting at a rally. It can be meeting with a community leader. It can be, getting coffee with somebody who does research. I think advocacy is definitely something that takes time. And you might not always get the outcome you want at the time that you want either, but I think you always, if you're continuing to pursue what you're passionate about, I think you'll always make small steps towards that goal.
Yeah, I would echo the idea that there is no right way to be involved in politics, and certainly no right way to get started being involved in politics. I think for me, and for a lot of us, we have this idea of like what being a political person looks like, or what being involved in politics looks like. But as Jenny said, like it can look like reaching out to someone to get coffee. It can look like volunteering an afternoon for a nonprofit. It can look like making some calls to your legislators to advance an issue. There's no like legitimate way of and non-legitimate way of participating in politics. They're all necessary to keep the system going. Yeah, I think that's what I'd say. And for Asian Americans, just doing it and showing up and putting in the effort is kind of radical. And it does make a change in and of itself.
Yeah, definitely showing up is radical for us, I think. What I would boil it down to is don't let other people's doubt of you become your self-doubt. And what I mean by that is, as people, hopefully most people on this call do identify this way, but as API and as a young person, and also if you're queer too, like I am, you have 3 layers of barriers in front of you. People will judge you for these things, right? And what it is you do in life, whether professionally, publicly, politically, whatever it is, there will always be that stigma, right? Ageism is the most common one, where they just say, oh, this young person, this is things people have said to me, and they're like, oh, are you married? Do you have a house or whatever? And I'm like, no, I don't have any of those things. And they're like, why are you good at these things? And I don't have to. I don't have to have these things, right? But people will doubt you just based on the way you look or the way you love or whatever. And especially as East Asian, like I'm going to look this way, like until I'm 52. So people are always going to think I'm 17. People thought I was 17 on the campaign. I'm like, no, I'm not. they'll always doubt you that way, right? But what I mean by that is like how they think of you in an ageist perspective or even a racist perspective sometimes, like don't let that become your self-doubt. As young people, as Gen Zers or millennials, you know, I think we have a lot of self-doubt already about the world, but that self-doubt I think always makes us stronger. Because you say, well, I don't know enough about this thing. So then you go seek out information, or I don't know these people, so I will go do that thing. So use that self-doubt to empower yourself, and it's okay to not know something or okay to feel overwhelmed. I feel overwhelmed all the time. It's okay. Because there's just so much to do and so much to learn. And that's not our fault. We just inherited a lot of messes to fix. So feel like, you know, so feel okay to get out of comfort zone, but also realize when you are comfortable, when you are uncomfortable. Yes, discomfortable is not a word. Uncomfortable. So you can always seek out resources and other people that are willing to do it. I'm going to drop in the chat later all my social media and even my email handles and stuff. And you can always follow. Hopefully you'll follow like all that stuff. You can also reach out. I'm pretty active on those things. And there are people who always ask me, you know, what advice I can give them. And, you know, from today, I also give you, you know, everything is dependent on your situation, right? There's no clear-cut path to either being elected or whatever, or an activist. Everyone finds differently. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that, right? You don't have to go to med school. You don't have to go to law school or something. You just kind of organically figure it out and it works. It depends on the moment, right? So really, you know, when you're ready to take that leap, either running for office, becoming an activist, or doing something that might seem scary in your life, you will know when that is ready. You know, don't let any gatekeepers tell you otherwise. People who will say you're too young, you're too Asian, you're too queer, something like that. Don't listen to them. Listen to yourself. You know, you will know when you are ready. So I'll drop that in the chat and everything, but I hope you all go forward and really inspire more of your peers to get involved.
Thank you so much. So it really sounds like, first of all, the idea where you shouldn't let other people's way that they perceive you to become how you perceive yourself, because ultimately everyone's route to politics is different and unique, and that is completely okay. And it's really just about what you're passionate about, and that is what determines your route. There's no one right answer. So anyway, this wraps up our speaker portion. I want to thank all of our speakers for taking the time to join us today, as well as invite them to drop their information, as I see Alex has already done, in the chat. We're now going to transition to a presentation. So once again, thank you so much to our speakers for coming, and you can all feel free to head out, because I'm sure you're all very busy people, but thank you.
All right, hi, I'm Anisha, and firstly, I want to reiterate a big thank you to all our speakers for answering all of those questions and giving us some amazing insight into their own political journeys. Before we move into the workshop portion of our webinar, let's talk about AAPI representation in terms of statistics. Currently, only 3.2%, or 17 of our congressmen and women, are members of the AAPI community, with 14 serving in the House of Representatives and 3 in the Senate. While these numbers themselves may seem small, only 36 representatives and 9 senators from the AAPI community have been elected, and that's less than 0.1%. Furthermore, throughout the history of our country, there have only been 4 AAPI presidential candidates: Hiram Fong, Patsy Fink, Bobby Jindal, and Andrew Yang. With just a 47% national voter turnout and only 31% of members being contacted by campaigns, it's clear that there's a broad disengagement from politics within the AAPI community. However, this does not mean that our voice does not matter. In fact, Asian Americans and the AAPI communities often constitute the winning margins in many state districts. Our representation and our engagement do matter.
Asian American representation really matters. And the truth is, there's like 3 main facets when we look at this. Primarily, it's because we need to enforce better policies. We can't let people who aren't Asian Americans and who don't understand necessarily our stories and our experiences to decide upon policies that affect Asian Americans the most. So what's important about Asian American representation is it gives us the pathway to say what we want. And down here, as you see, AAPI voices need to share their stories. It allows us, it empowers us to be able to share what we need and share what we really appreciate and share our values. And at the end of the day, that comes down to policies that will help all of us in the end. But also it's important because Asian American youth deserve role models to look up to. Because the truth is a lot of youth don't see Asian American representation in leadership positions. They don't see Asian Americans running for president or Congress or just even the local legislature. The truth is, once we start introducing these leadership roles, Asian American youth will be feeling empowered to become actual activists and change makers and politicians. So it's going to be more of a future vision as well, not just a present vision.
So going right into that, here are some opportunities that you can take advantage of to get more involved in politics. The Gates Scholarship is a program that provides full scholarships for 300 low-income minority students per year. Junior State of America is a student-run organization that promotes political engagement, leadership, debates, volunteering, and activism. The Senate Youth Program is an opportunity for you to spend 1 week in Washington to experience the government in action. And the CARE, or Council on American Islamic Relations, is a nonprofit grassroots civil rights and advocacy organization that seeks to promote a positive image of Islam in America, and anyone is welcome to apply.
Awesome. And we saw a lot of questions in the chat on different ways to get involved and different opportunities, different ways for internships. When we were thinking about that, when we were during the actual call with the speakers, we thought of some interesting opportunities. So Middle Ground itself, obviously, it has a lot of chapters, and within those chapters, there's a lot of leadership roles to get involved with. For example, you can become like the treasurer or just like the founder of your chapter. And within these chapters, there are also like a diverse set of internship opportunities or just opportunities in general. But also Middle Ground itself is also hosting basically a connection with the AAWPI, which was talked about earlier in the webinar. And essentially, we're trying to figure out a way to connect members of Middle Ground or just members of the Middle Ground community with internships, political internships. And we believe that this is really useful because obviously it's a good way for the youth to get involved in politics. But also, we also laid out some internships on this slide as well. For example, one of these is the Borgen Project. And the Borgen Project aims basically to make global poverty a focus in US foreign policy. So essentially, you can apply to become a journalist, a writer, an editor, or a PR/visual editor. And this internship is aimed more at college students and older, just people who are not necessarily in high school. And the same goes for the White House internship, which provides very direct hands-on program, it's a very hands-on direct program at the White House, which gives you the opportunity to literally be with the president and be with the first lady and be with all these other members of the White House in order to do research, inquiries, staffing events, speakers and service projects with local nonprofits. And that's also open to college students and graduates. But as high schoolers, it's important to be able to find these opportunities as well in order to be engaged, obviously, as a youth. And one of these ways is you can get a lot of campaign internships. Now, this is really important because this year, 2020, is an election season. So there are literally hundreds of campaigns nationwide that are basically calling out and trying to get youth to join their campaigns, because the truth is COVID-19 shifted the trajectory of all of these campaigns. So what's really useful is that a lot of them are looking for these youth to help them, or just more people to help them. And they can include a lot of tasks like phone banking and text banking or groundwork, but it's only the truth that many are remote during coronavirus. But how do you get all of these campaign internships? A lot of them are available on social media or just through cold emailing. For example, if you go on Reddit, you can find a lot of different opportunities. The same even for TikTok. There's a whole political side of TikTok that if you're on, you can find all sorts of internships and opportunities, essentially. But if you really want to, if you find a candidate that you really, really enjoy and look up to, then perhaps you can just cold email them for some opportunities, and maybe they'll even accept and you can become an intern for them. And that's a really, really great way to show different ways that you can be civically engaged. Additionally, when you apply for a lot of these internships, you are going to need resumes. And resumes are really important to just kind of show who you are. And that's why when you make a resume, tailoring the resume to who you are is literally everything. It's not necessarily just what your qualifications are or who you are, but it's also you're basically putting yourself out there to a person who's perhaps you've never interacted with. And that's why it's so important. It's because it's a way to like kind of express yourself essentially. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. For example, you can choose all different types of, for example, layouts that you can use within these resumes. For example, here we listed 3 different ones, and these are all available on Canva. And Canva is essentially a graphic design tool that you can use to basically make anything. And for example, they have a lot of resume templates. As you can see, all 3 of these are incredibly diverse, and they're all very different. And it's all just dependent on how you want to express yourself to what you're applying for. However, there's some important things when it comes down to making a resume. For example, you're going to want some things such as your name, obviously, but also it's got to be a very significant part of your resume that really, really, really pops out in order for people to remember who you are. Perhaps your biography, perhaps your experience, perhaps some skills that you have, some awards that you've gotten. And as high school students, a lot of what it comes down to, especially when we go out there and we try to contact people, are relevant courses, because that kind of dictates who we are and what we've learned in our childhood so far. But also our contact information, so that people can get back to you if they want to contact you more, or if they just want to talk to you about the future internships or opportunities that you have down the line. And of course, resumes are super interesting. And if you want, you can contact the Middle Ground team for more information on these resumes, as it's a really important part of putting yourself out there and just providing opportunities and basically getting those opportunities as well.
So before we end this webinar, I think one of the questions was to go back to the opportunities slide. So if we could just quickly show that. So, okay. Yeah, I think that should be good.
Yeah, so while we look through this last slide, I just wanted to thank everyone who joined us today on behalf of the Middle Ground organization. As Bryce mentioned earlier, if you're interested in getting involved, there are chapter organizations among the state. Not every single state has one, but you can find it on the Middle Ground website. If not the website, if you look us up on Instagram, if you do Middle Ground period, then your state abbreviation. So for Massachusetts, it would be middleground.ma. Then you can find a chapter. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to send us an email. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. And we will be sending out a short feedback form in the near future, as we're always looking to improve and grow. And also, we have a really fun raffle for you all because you all came today. We will be doing the raffle after this webinar and announcing the winner via email. The 2 winners, actually 2. You have the chance to win a $10 gift card to Amazon. But anyway, so we will email the winners. If you have an email that is different from the one that you used to register for this webinar, please, please, please just drop that in the chat, and we will be sure to use that email when we're running the raffle. So yeah, that's it from our end. Thank you so much for coming, everyone.
And just another note, if you please feel free to contact us via any of our social media platforms. And if you want to stay updated on what events we are focusing on, you can follow our blog on middlegroundinitiative.org.
All right, bye everyone.